Välkomna tillbaka till Studio Webbdagarna här på balkongen med utsikt över Webbdagarnas mingelutrymme. Det är kafferast och vi är här för att sända igen. Ada, du har precis varit iväg och modererat ett spår.
Jajamän, jag har pratat e-postkommunikation. Och det är krångligt ord men ganska mycket roligare än det låter, kan jag säga.
Blev det något drag då?
Ja, absolut. Vi hade sista föreläsaren hade 91 slides som han tog sig igenom på 20 minuter.
Det är bra.
Ja,
bra jobbat.
Då kan man kommunicera. Kan man säga.
Ja, precis. And with us now for this session we have an amazing guest. Welcome Mr. Kevin Kelly.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we've already had the chance to enjoy you in one of your sessions. What was the session about?
The session was about coming disruptions in technology, what we expect will be the kinds of things that will upset existing business models, our expectations, maybe flip the social and communities a little bit, and also provide opportunities for entrepreneurs.
I was wondering about that because I think often when people try to predict the future, what they miss out on is technology and how technology will impact our lives and our societies. But if you look back, do you have any examples of like historical disruptive technologies that have changed the way that we live now?
Yes, there are a number of very potent disruptive technologies in the past. A very easy example would be electricity.
Yeah.
So there was tremendous disruption caused by bringing electricity into homes and factories. And the important thing to remember was not just that it required new methods to make things, but it required new institutions to absorb that change. And that's why it almost took 30 years for the full effects of electricity to be shown in the economic statistics. So in the beginning, electricity did not immediately create all the productivity that we have now seen later on, because it takes 30 years for the institutions. So they bring electricity in, and it just disrupts the ways in which business is done.
But do you think it will still last 30 years until we adapt to new technologies? I
think it will. And in fact, the measurements show that it took almost 30 years before computers were revealed in the productivity statistics. And I think it's going to be another decades before we see the full effect of actually the internet.
It's interesting with electricity as well, because for a couple of years there, or for a couple of decades really, it was kind of uninteresting because it was just there, it was abundant. You know, you had power in the wall and no one really cared about electricity. Now electricity, or power rather, is again a focal area of innovation and disruptive. Will we see electricity really take off as something that forces innovation?
Yes, and of course in electricity, we have plenty of electricity. The real innovation or disruption that we're waiting for is batteries, being able to store and move electricity around. And I think that that's a potential disruption that hasn't happened yet. You know, really good batteries that last a really long time, that are very powerful, and they're very small.
And how about piezo electricity in that amount? The translation of movement into electricity on wearable stuff, for instance.
Yeah, I think we can have we want even micro nano type batteries that don't require very much power but can be recharged constantly through movement or other sources of change. So there is plenty of room for disruption in a new kind of stored energy, as well as, of course, in energy generation and nuclear and all those kinds of things. But I think that a really truly disruptive technology will take a long time to be absorbed into the society, because if it's really powerful, it will change the organization and structure of how we do things. You know, there's no better example of big companies, say, trying to do social media, who don't have social media in their company, right? I mean, you know, it was like people trying to have an internet company and they weren't doing email. That's just not going to work. And so we know that the effects of email changes how the organization runs. Social media changes how the organization is going to run. So if you bring all those things in that I was talking about, you know, self-tracking, 3D printing, ubiquitous computing, all this kind of stuff. That's going to change the nature of the organizations, and they're the ones that take a long time to adapt.
And what about the rest of society? You said something about this morning about the time it takes for law to catch up.
Right.
Will law ever catch up?
No, it will never catch up, but it will catch up in certain areas.
Thank you.
It will catch up in certain areas, and then it moves ahead in front again. So, by definition, you kind of don't want it to go too fast. You want law to be conservative. You want it to conserve things. So so you don't want it to have laws out ahead of people's behavior. Basically, you want it to codify the social norm. And I think, in that sense, it should always be behind.
Yeah. I was wondering about the live logging trend. It seems like a big trend this year, and a lot of people are talking about it here at Webbdagarna. Do you think this is the year that's going to catch on more broadly?
I would define life logging as an attempt to record everything that you do in your life, not just the...
Yeah, what are you wearing there?
I'm wearing a Nike Fuel Band, and I have a Fitbit in my pocket. Yeah. This is just recording my movements, my general activity. If I was Mimoto, I would be recording everything. If I had Google Glasses, I would be looking at everything. But life logging is really doing that, plus capturing every email and every phone call, every picture you take. I think it's going to be a long time before that's really common, partly because it's easy to record everything. It's very hard to make sense out of it, to extract value. And those tools have not yet come. So I can record everything, as Gordon Moore at Microsoft did. But even he, with all the power of Microsoft, found it really hard to do very much with that.
The burden of too much data.
So much.
Yeah.
And so those tools for being able to help us zero in, to search through it, to make sense out of it, have yet to be developed.
So that's what I understood from Emodo that they are aiming to do with the pictures. I mean, 90% of the work they're doing is to try and make sense out of the information.
And by the way, the same thing happened in gene sequencing.
Right.
So right now, the cost of sequencing a gene is going down to pennies. All the work and all the people working in that are all working on processing that data, being able to make sense out of it. And so I think that back-end stuff is the more important.
But to kind of build on your question, when will it break? When is the tipping point? We talked yesterday slightly about Apple. Will Apple bring quantified self into the masses? Is that what we're waiting for right now?
Yes. So Apple is reputed to be working on a wrist watch band of some sort that's more than a watch, and maybe like a fuel band, and maybe like a phone. If Apple does produce a wearable computing device that has a lot of the quantified self sensors built in, I think that would be an acknowledgement that this is really here. They could kickstart a lot of things the way they did the smartphone and a whole ecosystem. And if it's not Apple, someone will do this, maybe not with as much flair. So I think there is there's a great potential that they can introduce something that would really be different, think different, as they like to do, make it elegant, and launch a whole ecosystem of many other people who would try to make maybe apps to run on this.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you make something that is full of sensors that you don't do anything with, and you let the developers try and ride on top of like a platform. So the idea of the wrist as a new platform, I think, is a brilliant idea.
Yeah, but I mean, as you mentioned earlier, we're in the beginning of the beginning.
Right.
But do you see any examples of how companies or organizations are using these technologies now? I mean, that could actually change society or how we live.
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously the disruptions I mentioned are all things that are invented now versus the ones that haven't been, which are probably going to be the bigger ones. But the reason why I mentioned them was that there are people who are making them. So, I mean, the 3D printers exist. You can buy them. They're pretty good for small things. There are people making a business. They're showing how things are disrupted, and they already are causing issues in law. For instance, somebody is trying to print a gun.
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, they've done it.
Okay, using it to make a gun. So how do you have gun control, which we don't have in the U.S., but how do you have gun control if anybody can pass a file and and print out a gun? So, you know, that's already having disruption. Maybe it's not a business, but it's certainly having a disruption. In terms of making a business, I think a lot of the in 3D printing, most of the business are in spare parts, and in making kind of artsy things that, again, that's more along the lines of things that could not be made anyway before, now can be made.
But also for prototyping new hardware, because hardware is blooming right now. It's
right.
But you also talk a lot about sensors. I mean,
yes.
I have to ask you about what you think of the hotspots in the world when it comes to sensors. Where is the sensor business taking off the most?
Well, I've seen some prototype sensors, and I think there's a couple. I mean, we shrunk GPS location, and we shrunk gyroscope accelerometers into little tiny chips. So that's what all these things are based in, and they can measure where you are and your activity. So that we've done. I think some of the new sensors are in the realm of, in the health, breath, where they can actually measure chemicals in your blood through your breath, and spectrometry, which can measure things that seem to us to be invisible but are actually visible to you. So right now, your face is changing color as your heart beats.
Yeah.
And there's a phone app that can look at your face and get your heartbeat, because it can see the slight change in color due to the blood in your skin that we can't see. And it turns out that there's lots of things, from diseases to other health indicators, that actually show up as visible light that we can't detect, that a really good spectrometer could check. So they become a sensor. And sensors that can basically smell, that detect molecules. That's a huge thing. All kinds of things, again, that we don't even measure right now because we didn't know we could measure, that we could begin to measure with these sensors. So that's the second idea that's really big.
Yeah, and you... So, please. and that's the point also, that before you didn't have these data, but now you have it, so now you measure it, and then what are we going to do? What is the next step? So do you have any...
With the data?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes you can use data to change your behavior. That's a big thing, whether it's health or productivity. Sometimes behavior can be used to create things that haven't existed before. So in a certain sense, when you're sending a tweet, you're sending data. So we can see social media is really basically as a different kind of data. And I think sometimes data can be used to see things that we couldn't see before, but also can be rearranged into making things that didn't exist before. So memory, let me give you another example. Right now there's lots of things that we think of require a human, like writing a story as a journalist. If you have enough data in a kind of utilitarian intelligence, you can actually assemble a story from something that's a very primitive kind of story by rearranging the data and putting it together into a story, like a news report about a ball game or a sport event, where you're taking all this stuff and it has an algorithm and it presents all the data and it recombines it into a story.
It's being done.
It's being done.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So that is one way in which you can take data, a lot of data, and make something. Another thing that you can do with a lot of data is that you can do science in a new way, without hypothesis. And if you have enough data, you can do translation, which is what Google does. So Google does one language to another language. They don't anything about languages. They just do it by having huge amounts of data and parallel text, and they can translate into new language. That's done with just data. So there's lots of things, most of them we haven't even thought of, that we can do with data as a new platform. Basically, data becomes the new web platform where you can do new things you never do before.
And I guess there's also an element of quantum physics in this. Whenever you observe something, you're going to change how it works.
Right. So every bit of data that you produces metadata about that data.
Yep.
And so it just expands so fast. Right?
And
so
from there on, we can start building stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think we have to wrap up. One last question for you. If you would give one advice to the crowd at Webbdagarna, something that they should personally start doing come Friday when they're done here, what would that be? Something tangible.
Yes.
Yeah, one piece of advice for everybody. I think I know what you're asking. Let me just think for a second.
1,500 people
I would say make new mistakes. Make a new mistake next week. Make one new mistake.
One new mistake.
New mistake.
Not an old mistake, but a
not
new
a mistake you've already made a couple times. But try to have something. Try to do something that will fail next week.
Okay.
That's an excellent advice.
Okay. So something interesting that will fail.
Something interesting that will fail.
Can you do that?
I think so.
I can definitely do that. No problem.
No, I mean, a new failure.
A new failure. Yes,
right.
promise.
That's the whole idea. Because I think I think we can get into ruts, and we think we know what we know, and I think that's the beauty of science, is that it's based on failure.
Yes.
Excellent.
Right. Thank you very much.
The beauty of science, it's based on failure. So thank you very much, Mr. Kevin Kelly.
It was really a delight being here. Thank you so much for having me.
Hope Sweden is treating you well.
It has been fantastic.
So we're just going to wrap up here, and then we're going to...
Go ahead.
Tack så jättemycket för att ni har tittat. Nu imorgon så kommer vi naturligtvis att köra igen, och vi har en tung rörlig förmiddag imorgon. Vi kommer att börja med keynotes från Måns Adler från Bambusor och Cecilia Bäck-Friis från TV4.
Just det, bland annat.
Bland annat, ja. Och sen så blir det en paneldebatt där de två fortsätter, och vi bjuder in Niklas Ekdahl från Viaplay och Anna Gernhardt från YouTube. Det kommer att bli en grym förmiddag.
Ja, och som vanligt så kommer vi börja klockan 9 och vi kommer att sända ända fram till klockan 17.
Ja. Klockan 17 imorgon rappar vi det här. Och som vanligt, fortsätt att följa oss på hashtaggen Webbdagarna. Skicka in frågor till Studio Webbdagarna. Och med det så säger vi tack för idag, va?
Ja, det gör vi.
Tack.
Tack.